Hello and welcome. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the WGEA webinar with Natalie Flynn of Equidi. I'm Emma Jones. I am the founder and CEO of Project F. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting with you from today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So thanks for joining, all of you who are here. This will be available to view on our YouTube channel afterwards as well, if you'd like to revisit any of the points that we cover. This is a pretty serious topic because we've got some legislated information or changes to legislation that have now been mandated. So in the last year, the legislation was changed or the bills were changed on what has to be reported, and very shortly this is going to be a legal requirement. So it's really important that we know how this applies to our own companies, what we have to do, what information we have to collect, what we have to report, and find out ideally how best to do that, how best to approach it. So we've got an absolute expert in this field, Natalie Flynn, who founded Equidi, which Natalie's going to tell you all about her company, but also and how they manage this, but also what you need to know and answer your questions. So please put your questions in the chat. They will come up here, and I'll be able to moderate those and pop them on the screen for Natalie to answer them through the course of this conversation. We've got about an hour, more or less. So please enjoy your lunch, tune in, listen, make some notes, and I'm going to introduce you now to Natalie. So welcome, Natalie.
Hey Emma, thank you for having me today, and thank you for the great intro. It's very timely to be having this, given 27th of February. I think that Australia, as we know it, will change with the new legislation and pay gap transparency. So thank you.
Wonderful. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Natalie, just to talk us through your presentation and some information about this new legislation and the reporting requirements and the reforms. So I'll leave this group with you, and I'll feed through any questions as we go. And please feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat as well, the people who are tuning in. And fire away, Natalie. I'm going to pop your presentation up on screen now, and then I'm going to disappear.
Very nice. Thank you. That's great. I'll just check I can move. Let me get this set up. Yep, perfect. Thank you. So we'd like to cover a few topics today, and it's really more information clarifying. I'd like it to be as 2A as we can. So as Emma mentioned, please do jump in with the questions. It's a bit of a complex topic. It's a big shift to how we've always done things. And I think that's the most exciting bit about it. I think it's a really positive step forward. So what I'll cover today is the Australian context and the business case for gender equality. I'm going to talk through the reform. So what specifically is changing, when's it going to change, and what does that look like? And then I'll share with you some top tips on how to prepare today so we're better prepared for tomorrow when these changes come. I'll start by sharing just a little bit about my journey and how I ended up founding Equidi. Equidi is basically a tech platform, a SaaS solution that helps businesses understand and close their gender pay gaps. So we do kind of three main things. We do deep data and analytics to point out and show you where they are. We then help you take actions and steps to close them. And we also have a reporting component. So the platform automates your board reporting and your WGEA reports as well. I started Equidi. It's coming into year 2 of the business, which is pretty exciting. I've always been passionate about gender equity, but through my career in HR and people and culture, when I got to the exec level was the first time I really experienced the impact of a gender pay gap or pay equity. So in my first exec role, it was basically a 40% reduction in pay from my previous role. It was around 50% less than what the benchmark was for the role, and around somewhere anywhere from 50 to 60% less than my male peers. After 2 years and top performance ratings later, I finally got the courage up to go to the CEO and have a discussion. I presented him with the data, and when he saw it, he was pretty horrified and fixed it instantly. I realised there was a big disconnect between execs and understanding data and analytics and how to help businesses make the right decision to not have pay gaps or to eliminate them. And so I got to thinking that a tech platform would be a great solution to this, where we could run through complex data and make it really simple for businesses to understand what's going on and then how to take the next best steps. This was coupled with my 15 years experience in people and culture. I used to do the WGA reporting in my business, and it was a pretty cumbersome task. But when you got to the end of that, you felt a sigh of relief that, wow, we finally got through this. We got the numbers right. We've answered the questionnaire. And you had the best of intentions to take positive steps forward and actually start taking action and doing something. But you'd really burnt all the time doing that report, and before you know it, another year's gone by and you haven't really made the progress you wanted to make. And so with that, I thought, what could really add value to people and companies? And that's taking action. So by removing the compliance or the heavy lifting when it comes to reporting, I thought that would be a really value add and help shift how we approach gender equity as a nation and for our businesses as well. Let's have a look at the big picture of what's actually going on. I often get people say to me, oh, surely this still isn't an issue, particularly in Australia. Sadly, it is. My slides, fonts are a bit out there, but basically at a global level, it's going to take 131 years to close the global gender pay gap. That's really mind-blowing to think that it's been an issue since the dawn of day and we still haven't made significant progress. In Australia, the gender pay gap has just reduced slightly from these last figures. So we're down at 21.7. We reduced that by 1.1% in the last year, but really that had remained stagnant for a number of years before that. The issue is such at a global level that the United Nations has identified this gender equity as number 5 in the list of 17 key sustainability goals that we need to achieve around the world. Australia has improved its progress on the global scale. I think at the moment we've vastly improved. I think in 2022 we were ranking around 43. I think now we're down to around 21 or 22 on the global scale. So we still do have a lot of work to do when it comes to closing the gender pay gap. The business case for gender equity, so it's not just a societal or economic issue, it's a business issue too. The difference with the gender pay gap, and one important thing to note, is there's a number of factors that feed into it, and there's no silver bullet to solving it. But the research does suggest that the business benefits result in better performance across the company. So those companies who do invest and make progress on diversity and equity generally improve on financial performance by around at least kind of 33% better. It creates better ideas, so more diverse thoughts, and that comes across any aspect of diversity, not just gender, lead to better business outcomes. It helps attract better talent into the business. And I'll touch on this a bit later because this is going to be what I predict is one of the key game changers across the country this year with publishing those gender pay gaps. It helps retain talent. Employees want to work for companies that stand behind their values, that it's not just a tokenistic tick the box and then, say we're doing something but not actually mirror that in the background. So that's going to become, again, another big topic this year when those pay gaps are made transparent. It also helps with your brand. If you stand behind and make action and really sign up to committing to reducing pay gaps or gender equality on the whole, I think the companies that people really want to work for, and we see that time and time again. I talked a little bit about the societal benefits overall. It increases the quality of leadership. There's better economic participation. This is to the tune of, in the Australian economy, billions of dollars, and globally it's trillions of dollars. And overall, better health and wellbeing in our workplaces, which is something that we all want to see. I'll move now into the reforms and explain what's happening. And I'll take a bit of time to work through these because, as I said, they're what I call, or what I refer to as, a seismic shift from what we have been doing. And gender pay gaps are just the start of what's actually being published. So late last year, employees got back their WGA executive summaries from the WGEA. So all those companies who report, so that's every company in Australia with over 100 employees for private enterprise. For the government side, it is basically optional for now, but for the Commonwealth agencies, that will start from this year, that it will be mandatory reporting as well. But basically, for all of Australia, any company with over 100 people. So last year, people submitted their data by, the reporting period is really 1 March to 31 May, and that is the data that has fueled what we're going to be seeing on the 27th of Feb when pay gaps are published. So those executive summaries were shared back with companies that basically told them what the published pay gap will be for their business, and ran through their remuneration quartiles and representation as well. At the moment, the WGA have now committed the date to publishing, which I referred to before, which is going to be the 27th of February. So that's going to be an exciting day and really a day to go down in history. It's going to change how we approach everything with gender equity. And not only are they publishing pay gaps, it's the remuneration quartiles. And when I show you that, that will make a bit more sense. I've got a slide in a few time to explain that in a bit more detail. So from April and the next reporting period, employers are going to ask to provide more information. So at the moment, there are some optional fields in the reporting. Some of that is around age or locations. And up until this year, it has been optional to report the CEO remuneration. That's all about to change from this year. It'll be mandatory now. So all CEO remuneration will have to be disclosed as part of this process. There's also quite a few changes. If any of you have come across or read about the new Respect at Work legislation, there's a lot of changes in regards to reporting on sexual harassment and harassment on the grounds of sex discrimination. They will now be mandatory. And I'll talk to the new 6 gender equality indicators and explain in a bit more detail there some of the changes in relation to that too. Larger employees, so that's any company with over 500 people, they're going to have to report on and show a policy or a strategy for all of these 6 gender equality indicators. In the past, that hadn't been something that was collected. I think the WGA, there was a survey component in which you answered the questions, and a question might be, for example, do you have a gender equality strategy or policy? So those came through, but it wasn't ever asked, were you doing something about it? So that's going to change now, and I think that's a really positive step forward, and companies are going to have to report on what action they've actually been taking. And that will start from this next reporting cycle from April, May, when that finishes. As I mentioned before, the Commonwealth public sector are going to be reporting from this year, and so that will be great to see that those companies or those government agencies come into the mix as well. Now, I mentioned the gender equality indicators, the GEIs. I'll talk through a little bit about what they actually include or what that's going to involve as well. So at the moment, the WGA have actually overhauled their whole data centre already in terms of how this is going to be displayed. So if you're a company that already reports to the WGA, so if you have over 100 and have reported, you'll be able to go into that data centre today and see most of this information up there now, because this is all actually publicly available now. So basically, it will talk through, first of all, the gender composition of the workforce. That's really understanding, in terms of quartiles, they've separated it, but where women and men are situated across the breadth of the organisation. So there'll be details on all of that, and companies will be asked to show their progress on that as well. In terms of governing bodies, they'll be asked to provide the composition on that too. So that's basically boards. So a lot of companies report on that at the moment, but that will be a specific indicator for the WGA. Board composition this year for the first time didn't make any progress. And that was a bit of a concern, given there's been such a push in terms of representation of women on boards. So I think they're going to be really focused on showing your composition of the board and then seeing what strategies you may have in place around getting a more diverse board in place. The big one that we're going to talk on as well, equal remuneration between men and women. There's a number of questions, and as I said, the questionnaire is available now in there on all the companies who report. But this is where they're going to be showing the gender pay gap and remuneration quartiles, and then asking for progress on that as well. In terms of availability and utility of different documentation for the business, the WGA will want to understand now specific employment terms for employees. They'll want to understand if you have flexible work arrangements in place. That had been something that they have been asking for a number of years, but I think they're going to want to understand a more formal or more contained strategy on that to understand what's going on. Also support for caring and family responsibilities. They have asked again in the past on, do you have something on that? But now they're just going to be asking for action and progress on what companies do have in place as well. The fifth one is around consultation with employees in the workplace on gender equality. That can be in the form of whether it's surveying through a surveying platform or whether it's focus groups, etc. But they're going to be asking companies to actually embed that now and report on progress with consultation. From the last WGEA data submission as well, levels of consultation when it came to gender equity weren't also that high. So I can imagine that that's going to be a bigger focus in this next year coming through. The sexual harassment on the grounds of discrimination, as I mentioned before, that's to support the respective work legislation that recently came in as well. You've probably seen a lot of that out, but they're going to get a bit more sharper in terms of positive duty. Also in terms of reporting and training, so how are employers training their people to understand, I guess, equal employment opportunities, sexual harassment, etc. And then how they're managing their data around that. So in terms of if there are cases reported, is the board going to have visibility over that as well? So I think there's going to be a lot more of a push to understand that businesses are taking this seriously and making progress on that as well. All right, so as I mentioned, the big day is going to be the 27th of February. So on this day, the WGEA are going to be publishing the base salary gender pay gap. So you're going to get an overall gender pay gap. For this year, I mentioned before that they hadn't collected the CEO data set as yet. It hadn't been mandatory, it was optional. So in the past, the WGEA have always reported on an average gender pay gap. So that's the difference in salary, in average salaries between men and women, and that calculates the pay gap. Because they didn't have the complete data sets, they won't be running with the average pay gap for this reporting period. They'll be running with the median pay gap. And this is the first time we've seen the WGEA been using median pay gaps for this type of reporting. Next year, they will be adding in the median and average. So that's something to look out for. But for this year, it's important to note it will be a median gender pay gap. They're going to show gender composition across your whole business. They're going to split that into overall. So you're just split between men and women across the business, but then by your quartiles. And they're also going to show the remuneration attached to those quartiles. This is going to be game-changing. This is not only now showing gender pay gaps, where it was a gender-specific issue as well, but it's going to show remuneration across the board. So I'll show you in the next slide what that might look like. But it's something to bear in mind if you think of job seekers, if you think of even competitors looking at your data, if you think of anyone in the market, stakeholders, board members, partners, customers, they're all going to be able to see all of this from the 27th of February. So as I said, I'll show you that in a moment, what that looks like, but it is a absolutely seismic shift on what we've ever done in Australia. So before publishing the gender pay gaps on this date, employers can provide a link or a document to explain or make a statement in relation to their gender pay gap and maybe craft the narrative around some of that. So these statements are due on the 20th of February to the WGEA. I've been working with quite a few companies on this at the moment to try get this together and understand. The gender pay gap is a complex issue. As I said, there's no silver bullet, and there are so many other dynamics around the gender pay gap in terms of what can cause it, and it is different to pay equity as well. So in terms of understanding all of those factors, companies have been given an opportunity to explain why a pay gap might be at X%, etc. From late this year and early next year, just to round out those changes, as I mentioned, once the CEO or head of business data and also casual manager remuneration hadn't been collected either, so that will now be a criteria as well. Once they've been collected in this cycle from next year, they're going to be publishing on average and median pay gaps as well. So this is how it will actually look. So what we've done at Equity is we have seen the way the WGA are going to publish it, and we've built that technology in our platform. So our current customers use this. It's useful in a number of ways. We pull the data through in real time. So we integrate with either a HRIS or a payroll system. So you can see it every minute of the day, basically what's going on, and understand the data. This is really beneficial for companies because they will be able to see in real time what's happening. So instead of waiting, submitting all your data after all those hours of crunching the numbers and submitting it through and then waiting months to get the response from the WGA, you can actually see what's going on in real time. So this is what it will look like. So I'll just talk through what this will be. So on the left-hand side there, the median pay gap, you'll see there that that will be the figure that's published. So in this, this is a fake data set in our platform, but this is showing that there's a 31% gender pay gap on median salaries in the company. We toggle between include or exclude CEO because we already collect those data sets now. If we're dealing with global businesses, you can toggle for Australia or all company as well. So they're just our cuts. The WGA won't be showing that, but it will basically just show your median pay gap. We're showing average too, just to preempt what's coming, and so companies can keep abreast of that at the moment as well. Over to the right, this is really the fascinating bit. The representation splits that you'll see here, again, one slight difference to the WGA. The WGA collected non-binary data sets and have done now for their last 2 cycles, but they haven't factored that into the analytics yet. So you'll see on ours where the dark grey is, we do factor non-binary into all of our data. So you'll see that's going to be the only difference between what they're running through. But the representation split, so at the top line there, the total workforce, that's the company's overall split of representation. And then it will show there the average total remuneration. So total remuneration is base salaries, superannuation, any bonuses, commissions, or any other payments that were made to companies. It'll be showing the average total remuneration. The bars underneath that you'll see, so the 4 lines, they're the quartiles within each business. And so they're working out at the lower quartile what the split of representation is, and then showing the associated average total remuneration across all those 4 quartiles. So you can see right from the upper quartile in the 2 middle sections and the lower quartile. This is really being driven by a lot of the gender pay gap. There's a number of elements that does impact it, but a lot of if you look at any of the WGA data, whether it's the aggregated data or specifically in companies, a lot of it tells a very similar story. Where representation plays a key role in this is often women will be in roles that are maybe in the kind of bottom quartiles. They'll maybe even over-index on representation of women. But what you'll find in all the data sets that as the organisation gets more pointed, representation of women actually drops off. And so that's why they're now linking that to understand where it sits in relation to remuneration, and all that aggregating up to the company's overall gender pay gap. I'll talk to you now a few tips. When this all came out, I started thinking what would actually help companies understand this, because I know even from conversations I've heard or been having with people, I know from even the media talking on this, the big focus was on the gender pay gap, but not as much attention has been played to the remuneration side. And I think that we need to really understand both and what that's going to mean for your business. So just a few of my top tips for dealing with this. And as I mentioned, this is a complex piece. There's a lot to it. So for today, we're going to try focus on getting as much as we can out of helping you understand and then giving you some practical pointers to move forward. But some of the things I think that are going to be really important to do, firstly, is get across your metrics. So I speak to a lot of companies as well, and some of them still haven't even seen the executive summary back from the WGA. The WGA have put them in the employer portal. So if you have access to that, you'll be able to pick it up from there. But some companies still haven't seen them, and whether it's that they've lost passwords or something like that. But I really would encourage you to check out and understand what's going to be published. Aside from that, that's just one figure when it comes to gender equity. It's a headline figure of a gender pay gap. I always say the devil is in the detail with the gender pay gap, and to really understand what's going on, you need to get to the root cause, and to do that, you need to do some kind of deep analytical work to understand that, because they can sit in so many different buckets, and understanding it right down to whether it's a aggregate view of the whole business, which is what the WGA will be publishing, but what does that mean across different departments, locations, on a like-for-like role basis, etc. And as you get down to a more the pay parity type of issue as well. So I'd be trying to understand how you're looking, how you're tracking, what's going on, and just making sure you're aware and you understand, even at a baseline, maybe what are the different types of pay gaps, how are you sitting, and be prepared if there are questions coming from different stakeholders or groups within the business. One thing to consider is to review current practices. So what frameworks or strategies do you have in place already that supports gender equality in your organisation? And from there, what's missing? One particular one is even around having a pay equality strategy. And then what are you actually doing about that? Because in a lot of cases, a lot of companies have really great policies and strategies, but to make them alive in the business, you need to be coupling that with taking action and regular action. And for me, the WGA reporting is great for raising awareness, transparency and accountability. But once a year reporting really isn't enough when you're dealing with reducing or eliminating a gender pay gap. It needs to be much more regular than that. As I mentioned, all these for companies already reporting to the WGA, they are available now to see in the WGA data centre. So if you type in your company now, for example, and you're reporting, that will come up and you'll be able to see a lot of those. But I think for companies, it's important to understand what you have in place, what you don't, and just be aware of that, what your plan is then to maybe close those gaps over time. The next one, I've touched on this a little bit, know your stakeholders and know your narrative. As I mentioned, everyone's going to be able to see this. So whether it's future prospective employees, whether it's your current employees, boards, other leaders, partners, potential customers, etc. A lot of companies, even I see it all the time. They'll have, one of their values is diversity, equity, inclusion, etc. And, they have done a lot of work in this space. But if a gender pay gap is going to be published that maybe isn't aligned to that, you might want to consider how you are going to respond and how you're dealing with that. Because this really is the baseline. And I think expectations will get higher as time goes on. But it's really important to work out who are the key stakeholders. And, who might they be? What questions might they have? Some companies are preparing FAQ documents. Most are working really hard at the moment on that response to the WGA. But how are you going to shape your comms internally and externally on that? Some companies may have external or market reporting responsibilities as well. So important to consider all of that. The next thing is leading from the top. And this includes CEOs, leadership teams, execs, managers, particularly people teams and talent teams. I think people and talent teams are going to be impacted this probably more than what anyone thinks. I think talent on one side because they're the front door to the business. So talent teams are dealing with the external market and they're also dealing internally with all the people inside as well. So they're going to be the first point of contact if a potential candidate comes through and, X company says, they're a big believer in gender equality, etc., but their pay gap is, 40%. This, maybe doesn't resonate. Can you explain? I think the talent teams will need to be worded up or have awareness or have at least some baseline knowledge on what their response to questions like that might be. I think as well, one of the keys is even with talent and people teams, people and HR teams, there's such broad skill sets and not everyone understands basically right down to the data and analytics in terms of what's going on. So I think one good thing to do as well is to just bear in mind that you may want to have an education session with the team in terms of what is your understanding of what a pay gap is. As I said, it gets confused with pay equity very often. They are different things, but it's important that everyone's briefed and even with your line managers, with your recruiting managers or with your exec team so they understand some of the terminology around that as well. So I think alignment and understanding and having a path forward with leading from the top is going to be really critical. Next one is understanding the GEIs. So I touched on those today with you, but really internally as well, I think giving people an overview of what they are. And then for next year, because we're going to start reporting again really soon, I think from March, April, May is reporting season. So what is your company doing now on that to be prepared for the next line of reporting as well? So I think getting across that is going to be really important. The next one is ready, set, measure. So once you have your comms and your strategies in place, set clear metrics to improve. This isn't going away. This is going to be here for forever. And I think it's really important that companies understand that and show that they're making progress and that they're committed to that. So I think there's been a push as well from some of the WGA stuff on even target setting. So I think they're trying to encourage target setting. Some companies that I talk to, you get two trains of thought. Some really don't like it and some like it. So it's working out what's right for your business and where you're at. But the big thing is understanding those pay gaps and how you're going to drive them down. And then coupled with that representation of women and creating an inclusive and equitable environment, there's a number of different ecosystems that support and surround that are going to be really important to get right from now on. Just in terms of some things that Equidi has that might want to help you get started. I write quite a bit of content on this topic. It's close to my heart. I love helping educate people to understand this, because I think the way we actually do solve for the gender pay gap is creating awareness, educating people and encouraging people to make better informed decisions. So on our website, we have a number of different articles, but we have recently launched the free practical guide to the age of pay gap transparency. So you can grab that on there, but we just talk through some other considerations in the broader context of what you might want to do to be prepared and to make those next positive step forward. We also have, anytime you can have a platform demo of our software and see how that actually works. A lot of the times we talk about, and even all through all this and where we're moving as a nation, is reducing the gender pay gap. At Equidi, we're taking a bit of a different position on that. What we're trying to do is help companies stop making or creating pay gaps in the first place. So a lot of our technology is based on predictive functionality. So at point of hire or promotion, you run through the data sets through our platform first, and it will pull up with you and show you exactly what impacts that's going to have on gender pay gaps across like-for-like roles, your departments, your divisions and your overall business. So if anyone wants to come and check out what we're doing in this space, please feel free to book in, reach out to me on email or book in through the platform, and I'd be more than happy to take you through all of that. The last one here is last year on Equal Pay Day, which was August 25th, we launched a movement. We wanted to make a movement in the country around reducing and eliminating the gender pay gap. And so you can sign up to that. It's really just advocacy. If you're passionate about this or your businesses, we've opened up for companies to sign up and also individuals just to get behind the movement. And a lot of our newsletter and content will come from there. And in the future, we're looking to do some events to bring like-minded people together who might want to discuss different ideas of how you can be an advocate or a partner, but support basically eliminating the gender pay gap. Here's the QR code if you would like to sign up. But thank you for your time today. I know that was a lot of info, trying to condense it into bite-sized pieces in a short period of time. And I saw a few questions have come through, so I'm happy to launch into those if you're ready, Emma.
Back on. Hello. Okay. Thank you. I've been scribbling notes as we've been going. And so Jen, I'm not sure, I did ask Jen if you meant on the previous slide before you asked about Jen, how does this work for non-binary? I think the question was on the collection of where you were talking about real-time data. That slide, yep. It was, I think, that one.
Yep. Yep. So at the moment, as I said, the WGA collect it, but they don't include it. We do in our platform. So where we run it through, we'll run it through on a gender pay gap and show the representation slicing of it. So we just include it as part of there. If you see the WGA's one, that won't be there for this year. So we do take and deal with that data in platform all the time. We have a number of companies that have those data sets.
Okay. And on when you mentioned about where it's going to be published,
Yep.
are there other areas? Can you just talk us through where those? I've got some questions that have come through on Slack, and one of the questions that's come up twice is where it's being published. So I think there's a bit of a concern from people about how that's going to actually show up and where they could expect to hear it from.
Yeah, great question. So the WGA, so just on their website, it's a bit of a clunky website, and I've heard that it's not that easy to get your head around. Good, you agree with me. So yeah, it is hard to use. There's a little tag called Data Explorer. If you click on Data Explorer, it'll bring you through. There's a tab on the side, on the left-hand side there, that'll say organisation details. You just click on that, and then it will give you a little drop down, and that basically shows all the companies reporting. You can just free text in. So if you want to look up, I don't know, Commonwealth Bank, just type in Commonwealth Bank, and then that will pull up for you. You click on that, and then it will power it up for you. It's good to check out because it shows what companies already have in place in terms of their policy and strategy, and it has the placeholders for the gender pay gap and the representation.
Oh, that's there now, is it?
Placeholders are there. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And what about is there going to be like so from the WG? So that means anybody in the public can go and just check it and look and see what pay gaps there are. And what about do you think is there going to be any media coverage? Do you think, or any kind of how are they going to hold people to account?
Yeah, there's already been quite a bit so far. So I know Mary Woodward, who runs the WGA, has been out and about talking to the press a lot about this, which is great. I think trying to raise awareness of this. But yeah, there's been a number of articles written already. And if it's anything like what happened in the UK when this happened, so I think in 2017, the UK moved to this approach of publishing, or companies publishing their gender pay gaps. And it was a bit of a media frenzy, and particularly around, I think a few years ago now, on International Women's Day, when companies were all doing their posts, so they had their cupcakes and lots of photos of all the women in the workplace, all smiling, all happy. And then they created this bot, and it went around to all those companies and said, let's say it was, a company in the UK, here's a photo. Oh, here, we look after our women employees. It's all great. Then the bot went and grabbed their gender pay gap and published it and put it on Twitter and started saying, oh, that's great, so-and-so company, but your gender pay gap's 40%. So
brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, so we should be prepared.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
But I mean, you got to support it, haven't you? I think it's also good to get a bit of realism about what this actually means. It's more than, obviously it's a problem that needs to be solved, but it's a bit of a wake-up call potentially for companies to take this stuff really seriously and start thinking about how they actually can approach it. It's been a tricky one in the last couple of years. Certainly, obviously, I work in the tech industry specifically. The tech has taken quite a beating. And I think managing fluctuating salary levels within technology as a sector, and I'm sure it's the same with other sectors, but certainly it's been pretty prevalent in technology that it's quite a hard one for competence people to keep on top of. So this is good to know. Question on the actual pay gap and how it's defined. Again, you touched on this earlier, but it can be quite confusing. So if you're saying to a company, how do you work with this? Obviously, your software does this for people, so it figures it all out from their systems. But if someone's got to go away and justify something about doing something about this internally, what language should they be using? What metrics and numbers should they be using to create a business case internally to put resource towards this and to create a project for it?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I'll try and keep it because it can get pretty technical, and I'll call out some of the often pushback you'll get as well as part of this. And a lot I've heard, particularly since the WGA's movement has happened, and then people have got their companies' results back, because this is where, and if you are going and trying to get some support or investment behind it, you do need to understand and be prepared. So basically, the pay gaps at the moment are generally calculated on average. So the WGA, since they've been doing this since 2012, they basically calculate average male salaries, average female salaries. It's all in for the companies because they're calculating at a overall basis. So it's everyone in the company, and that's the number that comes out. That is what we call an unadjusted pay gap. So what that means, it's everyone in. And this is part of the reason that from some of the conversations I had, some companies are saying, oh, well, this isn't right because we have pay equity basically at a role by role. So we've gone through all our roles and there's no gender pay gap, but then there's this big number at the top. Okay, so that's kind of what's coming back. And maybe even in your own businesses, you get this like, oh, that's not the right measure because all these other factors. I agree. The devil's in the detail. You need to really understand what's going on. So if you have pay parity across a business, but you still have that, usually what's driving that is representation. The gender pay is a measure of diversity. So what that means is that it's probably that you have underrepresentation at the top levels in the business. So these are all the factors that play in, and there's a number of different dynamics, whether it's unconscious bias coming through, whether it's a systemic or inherent issue that's coming through the recruitment process on the way in. You got to think as well, businesses, this new dynamic is kind of at odds to what we've always done in business, right? You go to recruit for a role, you might have a budget, but the idea has always been to try and use as little as the budget as you can. So this is a whole different philosophy or mindset to come in, and you've got to balance all of that within the business. So if you are going to talk about gender pay gaps, get underneath the data and understand. You do need to understand, like I said, the overall aggregate is a headline figure, but what is going on? Like, where do you need to focus your energy? Is it at the senior level? Is it in specific pockets of the business? Is it in certain role types? And then that will lead on to, okay, this is not just a pay issue. It might be, how do we attract more women? How do we grow more women through the business? How do we, promote, etc.? So it's all those dynamics that need to be considered.
Yeah.
So there's a lot.
In other words, what we're seeing here is representation where you've got leadership teams who are earning the higher salaries, so more men in leadership, and women in lower level roles, and that means that your averages are going to be
out of whack.
Okay. That's kind of an ongoing, but they need to have a strategy to deal with that, right?
100%. And the thing is, and you'd understand this more than anyone, it takes, these aren't quick fixes. These are things that you have to be really considered and planned, and they happen over years, right? You're not just going to switch it on and fix a pay gap. And sometimes I hear the other ones, oh, what if we give all the women a pay rise? I'm like, well, that's not really the answer either, because you're not understanding what the cause and effect is, right? So,
okay, I hear you on that. Okay, I've got a question about what's happening in the US. So it looks like we've got a couple of people that have tuned in or certainly registered from the US. They've been implementing, a number of states have implemented transparent pay in the US. Do you think it's going to come to Australia as well? And what do you think about transparent pay, which basically means you have to tell people salaries, right? It doesn't mean you have to publish what people are being paid, individuals. You don't publish any personal data. It means that if you're advertising a role, you have to put a salary on it. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been quite fascinating. I was in the US a couple of times last year, and because of what equidi is doing, there was a lot of conversation about this, and it was really fascinating, the approach and the philosophy with it. Many states have moved to or passed the pay transparency legislation. I think it's a great step forward. One of the things that I found really fascinating from talking to people over there about it, they thought it was the answer to solving the gender pay gap. Now, transparency is fantastic because you can understand a number of different things, but there's a few dynamics that go on there too. So first of all, it doesn't solve the gender pay gap because the gender pay gap happens after point of hire. So you still need to go through, you might have your range, but you might have, the range might be $80,000 to $100,000 for the role. You might have a male candidate who is on 100 or wants 100, you still may pay the woman 80,000, right? So these dynamics still go on. It doesn't prevent from that. Transparency is great because people can understand and work out whether they want to apply or not. But some of the things I've heard from some of the states doing it is that companies are putting up really broad ranges. So they're putting in, for example, if they have like 60,000 to 250,000.
Oh,
yeah. So that's not ideal in those scenarios. And the other things to also be aware, I think one thing that's going to be interesting over time to play out is that how many people don't go through or don't get collected in the data because they choose not to apply, because maybe they see, the salary is 100,000, I'm not worth that, particularly women. So I wonder, is it going to cause some of that they don't get into a process? Are we going to see a reduction of women or applicants through the process because maybe they may self-select out before it even gets to that? So they're interesting dynamics.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So that's one thing that, and we'll never capture that data because you won't know who opted out because it's the decision that's not being able to be accounted for. But in terms of in Australia, look, we see bits of it here. I mean, I know government always put the job grades or anything like that, so it's not unheard of here. Some companies do. Most tend not to. But one of my thoughts is that now that this information, like we see here, is going to be available, what's the harm now in doing it? So I'd like to see it happen. I think it's great to see. And look, it benefits everyone in the long run, right? But the real thing is because companies have been so secretive about pay and pay bands, that's why I think they haven't moved to it. But now this is going to be published. What have you got to lose now? It's going to be out there for all to see. So I'd like to see it. Will there be a push on legislation? Given this has just gone in, I'm not sure if it will be straight away. I like to think it will definitely become part of the way we work. I'm hopeful on that. And maybe it's from a different agency. Maybe it's through the Fair Work side. I know they moved on pay secrecy clauses and stuff. But I'd like to see it, and I'd like to see companies doing it. And I think this is game changing for it, given now this is going to be revealed.
Absolutely, I agree. I think I'd like to see more pay transparency, but backed up by a philosophy that is very well thought out about what it's going to do, and really robust talent acquisition processes that take into account that people's salary expectations can be different. Depending on a number of different factors, including between the genders. Certainly in technology, they are.
Yes.
So the processes of hiring have to be robust at the same time. You can't just have one without the other, I don't think. I was just going to, so I've got a couple of other questions here, which I think we still have some time for. So will there be more changes next year on the reporting?
Yeah, so far what we know of is the ones mentioned before. So CEO will now come into those data sets, which means now they can do average pay gaps. That's why they couldn't do average, because there was no CEO, so it wasn't representative. So that will be really interesting when that dynamic comes in. It will also change those upper quartiles because CEOs aren't in there right now, so they'll jump up next year. But yeah, CEO coming in, and then the big thing is going to be reporting on the gender equality indicators. So they're going to be wanting to see, and it's going to be transparent. So if you haven't moved or done something on there, you're going to have to report on that year on year. So it's going to be the WGA will see, and they will hear as well. The interesting place, and where Australia has gone, is where the UK and the EU have gone. The EU have got very strict on this recently. So up until 26 and 27, they're going to be really sharp on it. But they are moving to a model where if there's any pay gap exceeding 5%, the companies have, I think, 6 months to rectify it. So I don't know whether Australia will go to something like that, but given we're kind of following in a lot of their footsteps, it's not out of this world to kind of think we may get there in the future if the numbers don't go the right way off the back of this.
Yeah, that's super important, I think. I'm just putting up here because I just want to, I know it's over my face, but that just can't be helped. Actually, if I take that off, it won't be. There we go. So if anybody wants to check out the actual software and maybe book a demo of it, which I've had, I have to say, scan that QR code and it will take you straight to the website and you can book a demo with Natalie. What I really like about it is that it gives you the real-time data and it makes it very, very simple, because a very visual person, and anything along these lines, especially I think companies who have relatively lean teams, they need to have access, or it needs to be accessible to more than just a specialist. So you've got HR teams that, they're not all specialists in comp and bends or, the pay side of things. And so to be able to use something like this when you're deciding on salaries and offers, to work with hiring managers, for example, or for HR business partners to work with their managers on the teams that they're supporting, to say, okay, let's look at headcount planning, and to be able to have real-time data to work with makes decision making a lot better, not just better, but more accurate in terms of the outcomes, rather than having to adjust later. So I would urge anybody who's tuning in to get a look at how it actually works, because it was when I go into a demo for something like this, I'm kind of expecting it to be a lot of foreign language for me and stuff that I don't really understand. But actually, I was really pleasantly surprised at how simple using the system was, and the dashboards, and how clear they are. And if it was me running a business like that, or running a team like that in HR, I would welcome something that was going to make life so much easier for more of my team, and not just specific specialist individuals. So that's the QR code for that. Okay, so top 3 tips for employers or HR teams, people and culture teams, to be prepared for it.
Yeah, I think my top 3 would be, and given the time we're at, it really is only a month away, right? I think understanding companies in particular, this is a cultural thing as well. HR teams alone cannot solve this. This is one of those big hairy issues, right? And it's not easily solved. So you really do need leadership buy-in, and that is really important. It needs to be part of and become part of the way you work, right? All these decisions, whether it's REM, etc., it all sits into this architecture of ways of working that we need to move it to. So I think making sure everyone's on board and understands is really important. I think the people teams and talent teams, that's so important to help them come up to speed, because to what you said, Emma, HR is so diverse, all the different types of roles in there, and more as every year goes on, more things are, look at COVID and what HR became during that. And so, yeah, so all the time it's changing, and if there's no home for anything, it's like, oh, it's HR. So I think helping people understand and educate even on the little things will really help them, because you might, if you're business partnering and you have an employee go, hey, I've just seen the quartiles and I'm beneath the quartiles, why is that? You're going to be fielding those types of questions. So even doing a little session together or knowledge upskilling will be really helpful in terms of basics. On pay gap, on REM packages, etc. And then the third one would definitely be understanding your remuneration or compensation framework or strategy. So a lot of companies still, even at the bigger side of town, they're not really documented, and they're not something that they've spoken to employees about. And now you're not really going to have a choice, because the questions are going to be around, well, why am I paid here, or how do we pay, or what is total remuneration? So that's a big one. So if you haven't got that nutted out, or at least your philosophy down somewhere, I'd be trying to get that pretty quickly, because there's going to be a few, can you help me understand? Can you explain? And if you're really progressive and want to front foot it, why not try start running sessions now, talking about it, doing maybe focus groups or town halls on it. Yeah.
Totally. I totally agree with you. It's something that you think is simple, but actually it's not. Yep. And even in HR, it's a philosophy on pay is something that still has to go through a whole process to arrive at properly. Yep. So it's not a small thing, and it's just, and I think what you mentioned about everything kind of has been parred into it, or gets parred into HR. I think what a lot of organizations don't necessarily recognize when they give such a tight budget to HR and expect them to build all the systems themselves is that you only have to look at what happened with COVID, as you said, and new ways of working, that we saw a huge amount of burnout, huge. So the cost of those people well and truly outweighs the cost of having systems to provide for those things, rather than just adding more and saying, build a system for this, create this new, whatever it is. So yeah, I 100% amplify what you just said. Okay, so any calls to action? What are your calls to action for people? What are you going to say people need to go and do right now? What do you want them to do after they've tuned in?
Yeah, look, for your organisation, if your data is getting published, find out what it is and consider whether you're putting your statement through. I think that's the big thing. Some companies aren't aware they can provide the statement, and some, I've heard some say, oh no, we're going to hang back and wait to see what everyone else does. I think you control your own narrative. Your company's its own newsroom. So I think it's a good idea to be able to shed light because, as I said, a pay gap, those pay gaps are headline figures. What is the other context that you might want everyone else to know about that? Now, I think if job seekers are looking at this, if your company has a 30% gender pay gap, are they going to work there? Well, if you give some context to why that is, and most importantly, what you're doing to fix it. And I think that's really important. So that's what I'd be suggesting to people. Understand where you're at now. If you haven't or aren't working on your statement, get started on it. And then just be prepared, get together with your teams and work out a little plan on how you're going to manage it through, because on 27th of Feb, and then you're running straight in. I think, I'm not sure, but I think the WGA have been quite strategic in when that's landing. It's about a week out or 10 days out from International Women's Day. So it'll be very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, within the next couple of days, we're gonna send out, just to the audience here, we're going to send out some post webinar comms to reiterate some of the points that were covered today. What my call to action would be to wait until you've got those, and then set up a session within your own teams to talk about this. Yep. So that you've got something that you can talk to them about that's concrete, that says, how are we going to approach this? Let's have a plan. That would probably be my biggest call to action, along with probably just getting a demo of equidi so that you can see how it works and have, because I suspect that question may come up. What are your solutions? What do you think we should do? And then you have something that you can talk about. The other thing to mention that I was thinking as we were going through was those GEI points that you outlined. There's a number of those that Project F already has. So I know that tuning into this today are some of our existing customers and also people that have been interested in working with Project F. But so the accredited companies talk to us. Please talk to us about any of those that you have questions on, because we have tools. Like, as an example, for the equality measure that you talked about, having to show an equality measure, we have a survey. So we have a survey that measures inclusion. It's specifically designed for technology, but it works really well with your other things like Qualtrics or CultureAmp or whatever. So we have a number of things that I think would be helpful if you don't have them and don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's a number of things that you already can access as part of being accredited by Project F. And you also mentioned the Respect at Work a few times as well. So our next webinar is on the 21st of February. Everyone who's come to this one or registered for this will get an invite to sign up for that. And it's with the founder of She's a Crowd, Zoe Conliffe, who works. Yeah, you probably know Zoe. So she's awesome. And so she is doing the same kind of thing as you are for pay gap. She's doing for the Respect at Work bill. And she's getting the backing of the Human Rights Commission and Sex Discrimination Commissioner specifically to do this, because companies just don't collect this data. And this is a way of doing that. Okay, so I think that probably about wraps it up. We're at time. So thank you, Natalie. I just wanted to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing these insights. And for everybody who's tuned in, have a great rest of your day and keep an eye out for the follow-up communications. And hopefully I'll see you at the next live stream.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone.